3500 BC was a time of warring city-states and terrifying gods, as well as volunteer labour and some very nutritious diets. But the people of the world had a problem. It was as if their societies had hit an invisible ceiling. They couldn't grow anymore. When they passed a certain size, the amount of information required to run the agriculture and taxation of so many people was just too much for puny human brains to deal with. If societies wanted to grow more powerful, they'd need a way to record this information. They'd already figured out that cutting someone open wouldn't work, so they needed a way to get this information out of their brains to store and transfer to other people. And our next chapter summary from the book Sapiens is going to cover how the emergence of writing led to prosperity, poetry, history, and ultimately all of us being enslaved by the great AI lords, maybe. People are of course able to remember information and transfer it to others. For example, in Christmas 1914, all along the Western Front, men of both armies were freezing their asses off in the trenches. But in a shocking display of humanity, large cohorts of both men met in no man's land to celebrate the day with their supposed enemy, and there's the famous image of a football match between both sides. Most of these men had never met each other, and unlike where all animals have rough and tumble play genes coded into their DNA, there is no football gene. But regardless, strangers can play it because they've all been taught the same set of rules. It's the same with recipes and manners, we learn them, and the same applies to kingdoms, religions and trade networks, but it's different. You see, how to run a football match and how to make a carbonara is easy to remember, but large systems of agriculture, law and government which govern the lives of millions of people require the storage of far more information than the human brain can contain. Of course, animals like bees and ants can cooperate on a large and complex scale too, but this is encoded into their genome and not flexible at all. There aren't any lawyer bees because there's no danger of them forgetting or violating the rules of the hive. The queen won't cheat the workers out of food, who in turn will never go on strike for higher wages. Humans, however, do break laws and rules, and as someone who definitely owns a fishing license and follows all of the rules, I like to pin my rule breaking on the fact that social orders and laws are imagined realities. See my previous video if you haven't. And as such, we can't pass them through our DNA, and have to make a conscious effort to ensure they continue after we're gone. King Hammurabi of Babylon may have divided people into superiors, commoners and slaves, but this isn't natural. And if his successors hadn't enforced this system, it would have disappeared. Same is said with his laws, farming practices, tax systems, military records and calendar dates. He had to instruct his sons on these, which were all vital for running an empire, and his sons and grandsons had to do the same. But the human brain isn't adapted to hold this information for 3 reasons. Firstly, even though there are some geniuses who can hold more information than the average person, the human brain has limited storage. Secondly, we're mortal, and any information stored in a brain will be erased in around 100 years. We can transfer it, but it will get mixed up after a few of these transfers. And finally, our brains are adapted to store particular types of data, that being information required to survive as a hunter-gatherer. Plants, animals, landscapes and relationships with people. Real things and not abstract concepts in large numbers. That's just how they're designed, and in order to tax an empire you need information on possessions, payments, exemptions and debts. This comes from millions of data bits. So in order to get around the inability of the human brain to deal with large numbers referring to crops, money and people, some unknown Sumerian geniuses around 3500 BC invented a way to record this data outside of the human brain, and thus release their civilization from its constraints. They'd invented writing. The Sumerian writing system had different symbols for various numbers, as well as people, animal, crops, dates and territories. They were able to record information outside of their brains, but it was limited to facts and figures. If there was a great Sumerian novel, it was not recorded, and existed orally like things like the Iliad did until they were written down. Very few could read, and therefore only a few business transactions and practice tablets have been found from this period. For example, one of the earliest messages from our ancient ancestors reads, 29,086 measures barley, 37 months kushim, which most likely means that 29,086 measures of barley were received over the course of 37 months, signed by Kushim, which is actually the first recorded name that we have. It doesn't belong to a king or a conqueror, but a man who was most likely an accountant, if that's what Kushim means at all. And it's not a very impressive message, I know. The earliest writing was only a partial script. It can be used for boring crap like this, but you can't write anything interesting. But this didn't bother them. They'd only invented this script to do things that the human brain couldn't do. The people of the pre-Columbian Andes had another partial script, known as a quipu, a series of knots on colourful cords, combinations of which could be used to record mathematical data, and did so to administer the 10 million plus inhabitants of the Inca Empire. This was phased out when the Spanish invaded and just said Spanish or vanish to the natives.
Oh no! Stop!
But eventually the Mesopotamians did want to write more interesting things, and after 3000 BC they slowly added more and more symbols, transforming it into a full script that we call cuneiform today. By 2500 BC, kings wrote decrees and citizens wrote personal letters in this language. Hieroglyphics emerged, as well as scripts in China and Central America, spreading far and wide and being used for any task you can imagine. And because of this, we do get some more interesting texts, like this one from 1750 BC Sumer, where a man called Nani sent a customer complaint to a man called Ea Nasir. He stated, "When you came, you said to me as follows, 'I will give Gimel Sin fine quality copper ingots.' You then left, but you did not do as you promised me. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger and said, 'If you want to take them, and if you don't want them, go away.' What do you take me for that you can treat someone like me with such contempt?" Oh, it's so funny that this kind of stuff's been going on for millennia. Ea Nasir sounds like a top bloke. But the main task of writing remained and remains the recording of mathematical information related to the administration of people and businesses. The issue arose that whilst the brain can usually retrieve information almost instantaneously, information stored on clay tablets has to be stored and categorised and retrieved when it's required. Imagine one day the two Sumerians are squabbling over who owns a wheat field. One claims he bought it 30 years ago, the other claimed it was a rental agreement. They go to the archives where, as you probably expect, they were greeted by a sluggish and inefficient bureaucracy which couldn't really be asked to help them. A clerk begrudgingly found the tablet referring to the ownership of the field in a huge room of thousands of shelves, but who's to say that a more current tablet referring to the field doesn't exist, and that one wasn't destroyed? Or if the clerk couldn't find anything at all, does that prove that the field belongs to either man? You see, printing data doesn't guarantee efficient and accurate data processing, so this all gets very complicated. Sumer, Egypt, Babylon and the Inca Empire succeeded because they had good techniques for archiving, cataloguing and retrieving records they wrote, and an efficient network of clerks, librarians and accountants trained in data processing. In order to operate these systems effectively, people have to reprogram their minds to not think as humans at all, and to think in the partial scripts of mathematics. The standard associations of the brain have to give way to compartmentalization and bureaucracy. And before the 9th century AD, a new partial script was invented to store mathematical data very effectively. This was composed of 10 signs for the numbers 0 to 9, and it's known as Arabic numerals, even though they were invented by the Hindus they conquered, and signs of addition, subtraction and multiplication have been added and form the modern mathematical script, the world's dominant language. Almost all organisations use it, and things like the poverty line, well-being levels and credit ratings are all ways of displaying real-world things using mathematical script. And the fields of engineering and physics are almost entirely carried out using these 10 symbols. An even more revolutionary script of 2 signs known as binary may be the final form of this. It's able to write absolutely anything, including this goofy YouTube video. Because writing was originally a servant with which the human brain could overcome its shortcomings, but it's increasingly becoming its master with the rise of the language of numbers, which humans have been forced to think in order to live. The rise of computers and artificial intelligence may one day make us servants to the system of binary writing too. Thanks for watching.
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is...
From the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me. I craved the strength and certainty of steel, for the machine is immortal.